By the time I realized they'd turned my life into a street performance, it was too late to walk away without looking guilty. The sun was too bright, the sky too blue for the kind of ugliness spilling out in front of my parents' house. Kids biked past, sprinklers hissed over perfect lawns, and somewhere down the block a grill smoked, sending up the smell of burgers and charcoal. In the middle of all that normal, my mother stood on the porch like a stage actress, voice pitched just loud enough to carry to every open window. She refuses to help her own family, she announced, hand pressed dramatically to her chest. After everything we've done for her, she won't give us a cent. Can you believe that? I was on the walkway, halfway between the sidewalk and the front door, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, can we please go inside? We don't need an audience for this. That's right. Walk away. She snapped, turning so the neighbors across the street could see the tears shining in her eyes. You pretend you're some big success, but when your parents are in trouble, suddenly you're broke. A few heads appeared over fences, then a couple of lawn chairs scraped on concrete as people casually repositioned for a better view. Mrs. Carter, 3 houses down, paused mid-hose, water arsing uselessly over her flower bed as she stared. 2 teenagers slowed their bikes to a crawl. I felt their eyes on my clothes, my car, my expression, searching for confirmation that I really was the villain my mother was selling. My father stepped forward, face flushed, papers clutched in his fist. They were crumpled and sweat-stained, the red stamps and bold fonts visible even from a few feet away. He shook them at me like they were evidence in a trial. Nendi, $2,000. He shouted, the number hanging in the thick summer air. That's all we're asking. 90, 2,000, just to survive. And she says no. Can you imagine? Your own daughter turning her back on you. A low murmur rippled through the small crowd that had, somehow, become an official thing. Mr. Harmon next door folded his arms, expression pinched. Someone behind me whispered, 90, 2,000, in a tone that said rich and heartless in the same breath. Another muttered, I'd never do that to my parents. Just loud enough for me to hear. My throat tightened. Dad, you know it's not that simple. My mother laughed, a sharp, joyless sound. Oh, don't listen to her. She called out to the street, as if the coal deep sack had turned into a jury box. She's been lying to everyone for years, acting like she's doing so well, but when it's time to show up for family, suddenly there's always an excuse. I could feel the heat rising in my face. Part sun, part humiliation. Every instinct I'd learned as a kid screamed at me to keep the peace, to apologize, to fix it, even if I wasn't the one who'd broken anything. But another part of me, the exhausted, frayed edge I'd been ignoring for years, bristled at the word lying. I wasn't the one lying. Mum. I tried again, softer. You're leaving out a lot. This isn't fair. She rounded on me, eyes gleaming with that toxic mix of hurt and triumph. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Her gaze flicked deliberately to the neighbors clustered on the sidewalk. We worked ourselves to the bone for you. We gave you everything. And now that you've got your fancy job and your nice apartment, you're too good to help. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded thin, swallowed by the performance she'd orchestrated. My father jabbed a finger in my direction. Ask her how much she makes, he told the bystanders. Ask her about those pictures she posts, all those trips and restaurants. She's loaded, but she'd rather watch her parents lose everything than lift a finger. That's what kind of person she really is. The thing about being publicly accused isn't just the words, it's the silence that follows them. The way people who've known you since you were 10 suddenly won't meet your eyes. The way they start rearranging their memories to fit the story they're being handed. I could see it happening on their faces, the gears turning as they weighed my parents' tears against my tight jaw and clenched fists. I swallowed hard. You know I've helped you before? I said, more to myself than to them. You know this isn't how it helped. My mother cut in incredulous. She throws us scraps once in a blue moon and calls it help. Meanwhile, we're drowning in debt because we tried to keep a roof over her head, food in her mouth. Don't be fooled. She's been playing everyone, pretending to be generous, pretending to be successful. It's all a show, a fraud, liar, pretend. The words circled like vultures, picking at years of quiet sacrifice no one out here had ever seen. I watched Mrs. Carter's mouth twist, watched a teenager raise his phone like he might start recording. Somewhere behind me, a neighbor sighed, kids these days, and the verdict felt already decided. I stood there on the patchy grass of the yard I'd mowed 100 times growing up, and for a second it was like I'd stepped outside my own body. I saw a well-dressed woman refusing to help her crying parents. I saw the neat row of houses, the cracks in the driveway, the peeling paint my parents had never fixed. I saw myself the way they wanted everyone to see me: cold, selfish, ungrateful. But that wasn't the truth. They weren't just talking about the money. They were rewriting my entire life story in front of people who had no idea what really happened. And it wasn't the first time. Years of quiet sacrifice. The first time I realized money was a weapon in our house, I was 14, sitting on the stairs while my parents screamed about a credit card bill. They thought I was asleep, but the walls in that place were thin and the vents carried every word. I heard numbers I didn't understand then: APR, late fees, over the limit, thrown like insults. My mother kept saying, "You promised this time would be different." And my father kept answering, "I'll fix it. Just give me a little more time." Like a scratched record. It was always like that. 1 month it was the car. We were just borrowing from a cousin until the bank started calling. Another, it was a vacation we deserved after a hard year. Even though it went straight on a card they could barely pay the minimum on. There was always a reason, always a story about why the rules didn't apply to us. Always that same closing line: "This time will be different." It never was. When I got my first part-time job at 16, I thought I'd finally have something that was mine. I folded shirts in a discount clothing store after school, counting the hours until that tiny paycheck landed. The first Friday I brought it home, my mother's eyes actually lit up. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said, hugging me tight, already reaching for the envelope. "We're just a little short on the electric bill. We'll pay you back on payday, okay?" Payday came and went. The money never came back. It became a pattern. My earnings passed briefly through my hands before landing, permanently, in theirs. By the time I got into college, they were telling everyone how proud they were. "Our daughter's going places." My father would brag to the neighbors. "Full ride." My mother would add, conveniently skipping the part where I'd stitched together scholarships, loans, and grants like a quilt. At home, away from their audience, the tone shifted. "You'll be working anyway," my mom would say. "Just send a little something home. We're counting on you." A little something turned into regular transfers, frantic late, night calls about overdrafts, and me skipping meals so I could send $50 more. Those years blur in my memory into a loop of fluorescent lights and clock-out punches. I worked the campus library in the mornings, a coffee shop in the afternoons, and a bar on weekends. I learned how to budget down to the penny, how to sleep in 3-hour fragments, how to smile at customers when my feet felt carved from stone. My room was barely big enough for a bed and a desk, with pipes that rattled and a window that didn't quite close, but it was paid for in my name, with my exhaustion. My parents loved telling people, "Lena's doing so well. She's so responsible. She always helps us out." They said it like it was a compliment, like being their financial backup singer was an honor. Every emergency they brought me felt urgent, singular, impossible to refuse. There was the $3,000 credit card that would ruin their credit forever if I didn't pay it off in one lump sum. The repossession fee for the car they'd chosen with leather seats instead of the cheaper model, because we work hard, we deserve something nice. The medical bill they'd ignored until it ended up with a collections agency, suddenly my moral obligation. Each time, they swore it was the last. Each time. My stomach knotted as I wired money I couldn't really spare, telling myself that maybe now they'd learn they never did. While I was counting coins for Raymond, they upgraded their phones because the old ones were so slow, booked weekend trips. we got such a good deal on and bought expensive gifts for relatives to keep up the image of being comfortable. The photos they posted showed smiling faces at restaurants, remodeled rooms with new furniture, captions about working hard and enjoying life. They loved the way people responded. "You two look great." Neighbors commented. "Living the dream," friends said. No one saw the calls I got afterward, the soft voiced requests for help covering the fallout. I used to tell myself that when I finally made enough, when the struggle was over, things would settle down. I thought if I just worked harder, climbed higher, they'd stop needing so much from me, that the debts would fade and I could breathe. But with every raise, every new job, their expectations grew right along with my paycheck. To them, my success was a bottomless well they were entitled to draw from, not something I'd blood for alone. My life, whatever stability I had, wasn't some miracle they'd gifted me. It was built in the hours before dawn and after midnight, in cheap shoes and secondhand coats, in saying no to myself over and over so I could keep saying yes to them. So when they called me one evening, sobbing about a small problem with the bank, I already knew it wouldn't be small. I just didn't know they'd finally gone this far. The 92,000 bombshell, by the time I pulled into their driveway that night, my stomach was already tight with dread. My mother's voice on the phone had been too high, too shaky, like she was auditioning for a tragedy instead of living in one. "Just come over, sweetie," she'd said. "We really need to talk, but we want to do it in person." Those words had never meant anything good. Still, when she opened the door, she was all smiles and perfume, pulling me into a hug that lasted a second too long. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "So beautiful, so successful. I made your favorite for dinner, you must be starving." The kitchen table was already set, candles lit, my old comfort foods steaming in mismatched bowls. My father sat at the head of the table, relaxed in a way that felt practiced. "Hey, superstar," he said, grinning as I took my seat. "We were just talking about how proud we are. Our girl, the big shot." His tone was light, but his eyes kept flicking to a manila folder on the counter. They spent almost the entire meal on nostalgia. My mother told the story of my kindergarten play for the 100th time. My father threw in jokes about my nerd face, the way I'd line up my textbooks. They asked about my job in broad, vague terms, nodding approvingly at words like promotion and salary, not really listening to the details. The whole thing had the careful, glossy feel of a brochure. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did. As soon as the plates were cleared, my father got up, walked to the counter, and brought the folder back like it weighed 100 pounds. He sat it down in front of me with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "We didn't want to ruin dinner," he said, pushing it toward me, "but we need your help with a little situation." Inside, there was nothing little. Bank letters, loan documents, a foreclosure notice with our address in bold at the top, red stamps, words like default, final notice, legal action. My eyes snagged on the total and 92,000. It didn't look real, more like a misprint, until I saw it repeated on every page. "What is this?" My voice came out thin, distant. "Don't get dramatic," my mother said quickly, reaching for my hand. "It's just numbers on paper. You make that in a year now, right?" She smiled like we were talking about the weather. My father leaned back, folding his arms. "I took out some loans," he said. "In our names. Nothing to do with you. We were going to handle it ourselves, but, well," he gestured at the paperwork. Things didn't go exactly as planned. I skimmed the documents again, my breath getting shorter. My job title was listed in the background information, my income range guessed at, notes about family support, as if I were already committed to backing them. "Did you use my information to get these approved?" I asked slowly. My mother waved a hand. "We just mentioned you have a good job. That's not a crime. Besides, we didn't want to bother you. We thought we could fix it on our own." "How?" I forced myself to ask, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. They exchanged a look. "We invested," my father said. "A small business opportunity. Your uncle had a friend. And we finally did those renovations we talked about." My mother cut in. You know, the kitchen, the bathroom. We wanted the house to have good resale value. And the car, of course. We needed something reliable. People judge you, if you drive a piece of junk. It's all connected. Images flashed through my mind, the glossy photos my mother had texted me of their new countertops, the Instagram story of champagne flutes lined up at a cousin's wedding they'd helped out with, the shiny SUV that had magically replaced their old sedan. I'd told myself they'd gotten lucky, found deals, maybe finally learned to budget. Now I knew better. So this is renovations, a car, and somebody's failed business idea. I said, my voice flat. Nenti, $2,000 on things you couldn't afford in the first place. My mother's eyes filled instantly, as if tears were a switch she could flip. It's not like that, she whispered, where we're trying to build something for the future. For you. For the family. We just need you to cover this for us. Just this once. Just this once. I could hear every other, last time, echoing behind it. Every emergency, every promise. Guilt rose up like a familiar tide. What will people say if we lose the house? I could already hear her using that line, see the way she'd clutch her chest for effect. And under that, another voice. If you don't help, whatever happens is your fault. I thought about my own life. The modest apartment I still shared because buying was out of reach, the emergency fund I'd painstakingly built, the student loans I was still chipping away at. $2,000 wasn't just numbers on paper to me. It was years of my life, wiped out with a single transfer. It was my stability, my future family, my ability to breathe. We're not asking you to give it away, my father said, misreading my silence. Think of it as protecting an investment. We raised you, we supported you. Now you help us. That's how family works. Otherwise, we're ruined. Do you want to see us on the street? There it was, the final twist of the knife. If I said no, I wouldn't just be selfish. I'd be the reason my parents lost everything. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. My shoulders ached with the weight of all the years I'd already carried them. I stared at the stack of paper, then at their expectant faces. Fear, anger, and a sick, bone-deep sadness wrestled in my chest. The old reflex to say yes twitched, then stilled. No, I said finally, each letter landing like a stone. I'm not paying this. The silence that followed was so sharp it felt like something breaking. Guilt, threats, and the smear campaign begins. My mother reacted to my no, like I'd slapped her. For a heartbeat, she just stared, eyes wide, mouth open, as if the word itself were obscene. Then the tears came, fast and theatrical, spilling over as she pushed back her chair with a scrape that made me flinch. After everything we did for you, she choked out, pressing a hand to her chest. Everything we gave up, and this is how you repay us. She paced the small kitchen like a caged animal, listing off a lifetime of ordinary parenting as if it were a series of heroic sacrifices. We fed you, we clothed you, we stayed up when you were sick, we put you through school. You didn't put me through school, I said quietly, but it was like shouting into a storm. My father's face went from stunned to stone in seconds. The warmth from dinner was gone, replaced by a cold, a praising look I recognized from every time he'd decided I was being ungrateful. You've really forgotten where you came from, haven't you? He said. A little money and a job title, and suddenly you think you're better than us. I don't think I'm better, I said. I'm just not willing to destroy my life to fix choices you made. My mother gasped, as if the word choices were a slap. Destroy your life, she echoed. We're talking about your parents losing their home. We're talking about us ending up on the street. You'd sleep at night knowing that, knowing you could have stopped it. The guilt hit its mark, hot and familiar, but something in me stayed braced. You shouldn't have taken those loans, I said. You knew you couldn't afford them. You knew. My father leaned forward, voice low and edged. We'd already told the family you'd help, he said. Your aunts, your uncles. They all know our daughter is successful and takes care of her own. You really want to humiliate us like this. Make us look like fools in front of everyone. There it was, the real horror for them, not losing the house, but losing the story. I left that night with their accusations still ringing in my ears. My mother sobbing in the doorway, my father saying, "Don't come crying to us when life teaches you some manners." I drove home on autopilot, the headlights of other cars streaking past like accusations. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd even rolled out of bed. Missed calls, voicemails, texts stacked on texts. My mother, "I can't believe you'd do this to us." My father, "You've made your choice. Remember that when we're gone." Then the extended family chimed in, their messages a mix of confusion and judgment. My Aunt Rosa, "Sweetheart, your parents say you're refusing to help. Is that true?" A cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "Heard you got rich and don't want to share. Must be nice." That one made my hands shake. By the third day, the tone shifted from pleading to threatening. "If you won't help us, don't bother calling us again." My father texted, "You're dead to us if we lose everything because of your selfishness." Another message from my mother. "You know people are starting to talk. They're wondering what happened to you, how you became so cold. Is that what you want them to think?" I scrolled through social media that night and felt my stomach drop. On my mother's page, "It's heartbreaking when children forget the ones who sacrificed everything for them once they have their own lives. Some of us only wanted love and a little support in return." Dozens of sad face reactions, comments like, "You raised her better than that." And "Kids these days have no respect." No names, but everyone in our orbit would know exactly who she meant. My father posted a photo of the house, filtered to look extra bleak, with a caption, "40 years of hard work, and in the end you realize you were only ever truly there for yourself." The martyrdom was thick enough to choke on. My phone buzzed again. "Lena, what's going on? Why won't you help your parents? Is it really that bad?" At night, I lay awake replaying the numbers. 92,000. My rent, my emergency fund, the tiny retirement account I'd just started, the student loans I was still dragging behind me. Paying their debt would erase everything I'd built and leave me one crisis away from disaster. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother on the street, my father's accusation, "Do you want to see us homeless?" The fear tangled with anger until my chest hurt. I opened my banking app more times than I could count, staring at the balances, doing mental math, trying to see if there was a version of this where I could help without drowning. There wasn't. And even if there had been, I knew deep down that bailing them out again would only teach them one thing, that no matter how bad they messed up, I'd fix it. They'd never change if the consequences never landed. So I held my boundary, white-knuckled and shaking. I answered some messages with vague lines about needing time. And it's more complicated than you think, but I didn't send a cent. With every hour that passed, my parents' campaign intensified, painting me as the villain in a story they'd been rehearsing for years. On the fifth day, my phone rang. My parents' number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some stubborn part of me still hoped they might finally accept my answer. "Lena," my father said when I picked up, his voice oddly calm. "We've tried to handle this privately. We gave you every chance to do the right thing." My mother's voice floated in from the background, sharp as glass. "If you won't help us in private," she said, "then everyone deserves to know what kind of daughter you really are." I closed my eyes, feeling the ground shift under me. I knew, even before the line went dead, that whatever they were planning wouldn't be quiet. They thought humiliating me would scare me back into line. Instead, it would finally push me somewhere I should have gone years ago. When they called again a few days later, asking me to come over and talk one more time, I said yes. I told myself it was one last attempt at peace. As I drove toward my childhood street, I had no idea the neighbors would already be outside, waiting for the show to start. The neighbors' show trial, the moment I turned onto the street, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the knot in my stomach or the memories that clung to every mailbox and cracked sidewalk. It was the way people were already outside, hovering with that particular kind of aimless purpose that meant they were waiting for something. Mr. Harmon stood in his driveway, pretending to reorganize his tool shelf. Mrs. Carter was watering her lawn, even though the hose lay slack, spraying the same patch of grass. A couple of teenagers leaned against their bikes at the curb, watching my car slow to a stop. My parents had said, "Come over so we can talk." But the whole block looked like it had bought tickets. I stepped out of the car, forcing my shoulders back, and barely had time to close the door before my mother's voice rang out from the front porch. "There she is," she announced, as if I were a late guest at my own trial. Our successful daughter. Maybe now she'll explain why her parents are begging for help. "Mum," I said, already exhausted. "Can we please go inside? This isn't something we need to discuss out here." She ignored me, stepping closer to the edge of the porch so everyone could see her trembling hands, the tissue already clenched between her fingers. "You all know how proud we've always been of her," she said, addressing the street. "She flaunts her success online, all those trips and fancy dinners, and we never asked for much. But now, when her own parents are drowning, she won't even throw us a life raft." My father appeared in the doorway, holding that same stack of papers, even more crumpled than before. He raised them like a prop. "Nandi, $2,000, he called out. "That's what stands between us and losing everything." 92,000, and she says we're on our own." Someone whistled low under their breath. The teenagers exchanged a look. Mrs. Carter shook her head slightly, lips pressed thin. "Kids these days don't respect their elders," she muttered, not quite quietly enough. Heat crawled up my neck. "You're leaving out why you owe that money," I said, fighting to keep my voice from cracking. "This isn't. We don't need to get into details." My mother cut in, eyes flashing. "The point is, we're in trouble, and our daughter, who we sacrificed everything for, thinks we're not worth saving." She dabbed at her eyes. "We paid for her education. We worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs so she could have opportunities we never had." The lies landed soft and heavy like ash. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, feeling the weight of a dozen gazes pressing down on me. "That's not how it happened," I managed. "Can we please talk inside?" "No." My father snapped, stepping out beside my mother. "Why should this be private? They should all hear how you abandoned us. Maybe then you'll be ashamed enough to do the right thing." A man from down the block, someone I barely knew, spoke up. "She can't spare anything," he asked, incredulous. "Not even for her own parents." My mother seized on it like a cue. "She won't spare a cent," she said. "Yet online it's all success this. Promotion that. She talks like she pulled herself up all alone. But she forgets who was there first. We gave up our dreams so she could chase hers. We went without so she could have more. And now that she has it, she shuts the door in our faces. You wouldn't be anything without us." My father added, voice hard. "Any good parent helps their kids. But a good child doesn't let their parents sink while they sit pretty. Makes you wonder if all that success she brags about is even real. A real success would help their family. Fraud." The word wasn't spoken yet, but it hung there, implied in every sideways glance and narrowed eye. One of the teenagers lifted his phone, angling it subtly toward us. I wondered what this would look like in a 30-second video, me, in nice clothes and a newer car, refusing to rescue my teary, middle-aged parents. Without context, I knew exactly which role the internet would cast me in. My pulse pounded in my ears. "This is not fair," I said louder now. "You're telling half the story." Mrs. Carter shifted her hose, finally turning the water off. "Maybe you two should take this inside," she suggested weakly, but she didn't move away. No one did. Safety in numbers, I thought bitterly, as long as you're on the approved side. My mother rounded on me. "Half the story?" she repeated. "Fine. Tell them the whole story, then. Tell them how you turned your back on the people who raised you the moment you didn't need us anymore. Tell them how you watched us beg and still said, 'No.'" "You're twisting everything," I said. "You're the ones who took out loans you couldn't afford. You didn't ask me before you did it, but now it's my responsibility to fix it." "How is that?" "Because we're your parents. My father roared, stepping down onto the walkway. Because family takes care of each other. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Not anymore. All you care about is your image, your little online persona, your fake life. The word hit harder than I expected. Fake. As if the years I'd spent scraping by, the sleep I'd lost, the sacrifices I'd made were just props in a story I'd invented. I could feel my hands shaking, fingers curling into fists at my sides. I glanced around and saw judgment, discomfort, curiosity, but no one who knew the truth well enough to speak it for me. For a second, I considered doing what I'd always done, swallowing it, apologizing, offering something, anything, to make the scene stop. I could end this by saying yes. I could buy back my reputation, my place in this neighborhood narrative, with $92,000 and another piece of my soul. But then I remembered the folder on the kitchen table, the smug certainty in their voices when they told me I'd fix it, the late nights staring at my own dwindling balances while they posted vacation photos. I heard my father on the phone. Everyone deserves to know what kind of daughter you really are. If I stayed silent now, I realized I'd be agreeing with their version of me. I'd be letting them set the story in stone. I took a slow breath, feeling something inside me click into place. My voice still shook when I spoke, but it carried. You want them to hear the truth, I said, loud enough for every open window and curious ear. Fine, let's talk about the truth. Let exposing the truth, climax das confrontation. For once, my parents didn't have a script for what came next. My mother froze mid-sob. My father's mouth snapped shut. The street went unusually quiet. Even the kids on their bikes stilled, one foot on the ground, waiting. You want to talk about sacrifice? I said, forcing my voice to stay level. Let's start with the $3,000 credit card you maxed out when I was 19. The one you said would ruin your credit forever if it went to collections. I paid that off with my campus job. I ate instant noodles for months to do it. My mother's eyes darted nervously, but I didn't give her space to jump in. Then the repossession fee on the car? I went on. The one with the leather seats you deserved after a hard year. I drained the savings I'd put aside for textbooks so you could keep it. Remember that, because I do. A ripple went through the small crowd. Someone shifted uncomfortably. My father made a scoffing sound. You're exaggerating. No, I'm not. My hands were steady now. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin stack of papers I'd printed the night after they first showed me the folder. Some sick part of me anticipating a scene like this. I brought receipts. I held up one page so the nearest neighbors could see the highlighted lines. This is the $3,000 I wired you, I said. And here, I flipped to another page, is the repossession fee. Same month, same year, right after you bragged at a barbecue that I was doing so well, I could spoil you. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't grab for the papers. You say you put me through school. I continued, turning back to the street. You didn't. I took out loans. I worked 3 jobs. There were winters when I couldn't afford to turn the heat up all the way, when I slept in socks and a coat. Meanwhile, you were sending me photos from beach trips and weekends away. Do you remember calling me from a resort lobby to ask for just a little extra to cover the bill? A teenager near the curb let out a low damn before catching himself. Mrs. Carter's eyebrows had crept up toward her hairline. My parents haven't supported me financially since I was a kid, I said. But I've been supporting them for years, quietly. The hospital bill they ignored until collections. I paid it. The months they couldn't quite make the mortgage. I covered the difference. Every time, they promised it was the last time. My mother shook her head frantically. We never asked you to. Yes, I cut in, my patience finally cracking. You did. With tears, with guilt, with lines like, what will people say if we lose the house, every single time. I held up another sheet, this one showing a series of transfers from my account to theirs. These are the deposits I made into their account over the last few years, I said. Now look. I flipped to the next page. Printouts of their own statements, courtesy of an email my father had once forwarded to me by mistake. I'd saved it without fully knowing why. Until now. Same dates, I pointed out. Within days of my transfers, there are charges for new phones, weekends away, expensive restaurants. Not groceries. Not medicine. Not survival appearances. My father lunged as if to snatch the papers, then stopped himself, painfully aware of the eyes on him. You're making us look bad, he hissed. You did that yourselves, I said calmly. And that $92,000? I looked around, making sure the number landed differently this time. It's not a medical emergency. It's not some tragic accident. It's loans they took out while they were already behind on bills to renovate the kitchen, buy a nicer car, and throw money at a business scheme a friend pitched them. All while assuming, without asking me, that I'd bail them out if it went wrong. The word assumption tasted bitter on my tongue. So no, I finished. You didn't raise me to be responsible. I taught myself that while cleaning up after you. And being responsible now means I don't let you drag me down with you. Silence settled over the coal. D. Sack like a blanket. Finally, Mr. Harmon cleared his throat. Is that true? He asked, looking not at me but at my parents. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father muttered something about family business and twisted stories, but he didn't deny the dates, the numbers, the specifics. He couldn't. The papers in my hand spoke louder than their performance ever could. For the first time, I saw doubt on the neighbors' faces. Doubt about the perfect victim story they'd been fed. A couple of them glanced at me with something like apology. Others just looked away, unsettled. I felt suddenly completely done. I'm finished having this conversation out here, I said quietly. Believe whatever you want. I know what's true. I let the papers fall to my side, turned and walked back to my car, leaving my parents and their audience in stunned, echoing silence, walking away and rebuilding, resolution and aftermath. In the days after I walked away, the cult D-sack hummed with a different kind of noise. I could feel it even from my apartment across town. Through the secondhand updates, the careful pauses when certain people called my name, the way my parents suddenly went quiet on social media. A friend who still lived nearby told me there had been a lot of whispering and more than a few awkward encounters. Some neighbors, apparently, had started crossing the street rather than get pulled into my parents' orbit. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was Mrs. Paddle, the older woman who lived at the corner, the one who'd always pressed extra cookies into my hands when I was little. Her message was simple. I saw what happened. I always wondered how you managed it all. I'm sorry we didn't ask sooner. You did the right thing. I stared at the words for a long time, surprised by how much that small validation made my chest ache. My parents' messages were a whiplash carousel. 1 hour. You humiliated us in front of everyone. We'll never forgive you for this. The next, we didn't mean for it to go that far. We're still your parents. You can still fix this before it's too late. Eventually, there was what they called an apology. We're sorry if you felt hurt. Let's put this behind us. The bank is still willing to work with us if you come through. It wasn't remorse, it was strategy. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat in a quiet office across from a therapist I'd finally allowed myself to call. Telling the story out loud, start to finish, left me wrung out, but also oddly clear. It feels like I've just divorced my parents, I said, half joking. Like there's been a death but no funeral. She nodded, not looking surprised. We talked about grief and loyalty, about how love and harm can coexist in the same people, about how choosing myself didn't erase the good memories. It just refused to let the bad ones rule my future. For the first time in years, I made concrete decisions that didn't include them. I called my bank and removed my parents as emergency contacts. I changed passwords, updated security questions, stopped sharing anything about my job publicly. I set a hard rule with myself: no more transfers, no more loans, no more bailing out. If they called about money, I wouldn't pick up. If they showed up unannounced, I wouldn't open the door. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I was finally refusing to be ruined with them. The neighborhood adjusted slowly. A few people reached out, short texts that said things like, "Didn't know the whole story. Sorry for judging," or "If you ever need anything, let me know." Others stayed distant, loyal to the simpler version of events my parents had sold them for years. That used to keep me up at night, the idea of being misunderstood. Now, when the old anxiety stirred, I reminded myself their opinions didn't pay my bills or live in my body. I did. What mattered most was that, for the first time, I believed my own story more than theirs. I could look at my bank account without bracing for another crisis that wasn't mine. I could make plans, small ones, like a weekend trip I actually paid for just for me, and bigger ones, like saving for a future that wasn't built on someone else's emergencies. The silence where their constant demands had been was both eerie and peaceful, like the air after a storm. People say, blood is thicker than water, as if that should settle every argument. But drowning is drowning, no matter who's holding your head under. Walking away from that street, from their version of me, was the only way I could finally learn to breathe.